Harbor was blown apart December 7th of 41. That sent a signal to all of us. Everybody, my age, my buddies, that little town of Marengo, they were all going to service. Everybody was patriotic. Our parents couldn't go to, they couldn't go in, but they done everything to help to produce scrap drives, whatever. I just wanted to go, we all wanted to go win the war. And that's just the way it was. And maybe that's why they called us the greatest generation.
Robert Persinger was born on September 29, 1923, in the small town of Weaver, Iowa. There, he lived in a farmhouse with his parents, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters. However, the first of a series of hardships would strike the family with the Great Depression, a period of severe worldwide economic depression beginning with the stock market crash of 1929. Although Robert's parents had almost paid the mortgage on their farmhouse, the banks in Weaver, Iowa closed, and the family lost the farm in 1932. They were then forced to move around and rent farms. In 1939, Robert's father passed away. An uncle with a large farm in Marengo, Illinois, then invited the family to move in and help him. This is where Robert would live until he joined the Army.
So together, all of us were able to make a decent living, and I knew that if I got drafted, it was going to be very hard on my mother and my brothers and sisters. I could have easily been deferred. The draft board told me that they would defer me because I was a breadwinner, so to speak.
Robert started his Army career in 1943 at Camp Grant in Rockford, Illinois. After taking aptitude tests there for a little over a week, he was sent to Camp Gordon, Georgia. At Camp Gordon, Robert received basic training and was placed in the 3rd Cavalry Unit. This unit had been established during the Civil War and had just switched from horses to armored tanks in December of 1942 as a preparation for combat in Europe. Nashville and its surrounding areas were chosen as the American Army's training grounds due to the similarities between the Cumberland River Valley in Tennessee and the Rhine River Valley in Europe. In this region in Middle Tennessee, Army divisions were split into opposing red and blue teams and instructed to compete in a variety of European conflict scenarios.
We learned how to live outside, and learned some tactical situations, how we would use those maneuvers when we got into combat. So then we went back to Camp Gordon, Georgia, and the next thing you know, we were shipped to Columbia, South Carolina at Fort Jackson for 1 solid month of firing all of our guns, every gun we had. This was the final training. And then we were shipped to New York. Next thing you know, we were on a large convoy going to Liverpool, England. We left the Brooklyn area and went around the Statue of Liberty. And I can remember saying, as we were on this ship, well, I wonder if we ever see her again.
Despite German U-boat patrols, the convoy arrived in Liverpool safely. The danger was far from over, however. From Liverpool, Robert's unit was sent to Southampton, a city on the coast of the English Channel. Here, they fixed up their weapons and tanks and prepared for their imminent landing in Europe. On August 7th, 2 months after the violent Normandy coast clashes of D-Day, the 3rd Cavalry landed on what the Allies had codenamed Utah Beach. From that day forward, they continued through France, engaging and pushing back German resistance almost daily. Before long, they were at Germany's border.
We had to do night patrols, and go on patrols trying to catch a German or catch some Germans to get information. Across the Moselle River at night on a boat with a rope tied to it, and we would row across and get across the river and go on patrol and come back and then pull the rope. So they pulled us back across so we wouldn't make no noise going across. That sort of thing across the Moselle. Germans were doing the same thing on patrol and through those woods. You never knew what you were going to get. Anything at night where you can't see good is bad. You know, it's just anxiety, just terrible. There's no way that you can't be, you're scared, but then you gotta, I don't know what takes over. But you had to do it. You knew you were risking your life, and you just couldn't help but be scared. You know, we had a war to fight, and we were a long ways from home. You had no parents nearby, or no mother to, and a father to holler to help you, and you were on your own. And so you did get have friends. Every one of you were friends. I just don't think I ever had every guy we had I liked, and we liked one another. The rains came. By the first part of September, we were clear over on the east side of France, next to the Moselle River, which separates Germany and France. We were down in near Metz, France, which is a large city, and there was a big battle coming up. We had done reconnaissance. Our mission was always to try to go out and find the Germans and see what was ahead of us, because we had all the infantry and artillery and armored divisions behind us. So we were the eyes and ears, so to speak, trying to find out where the Germans were located and where their weaker spots were, and consequently that's where we made the pushes. And we engaged the enemy quite often. I would say, maybe sometimes pretty thrilling. It took 2.5 months to take the city of Metz.
With the fall of heavily fortified Metz, the Allies could now cross the Moselle River. Before they could cross Germany's border, however, they would face one more defensive barrier.
In that area, the Germans had a Siegfried Line.
The Siegfried Line was a German defensive barrier separating Germany from France and stretching from Switzerland to the Netherlands. Built from 1938 to 1940 as an answer to France's defensive Maginot Line, it was made up of bunkers, tunnels, and large concrete spikes named Dragon's Teeth that were meant to deter armored vehicles. The Siegfried Line suffered only minor attacks during the Battle of France and was mostly abandoned after France fell to Germany. However, the D-Day landings on June 6, 1944 posed a new threat to Germany's western border, and Hitler ordered that the Siegfried Line be reactivated. As American troops pushed through France and into Germany, they were faced with Dragon's Teeth and enemy soldiers in concrete bunkers.
It caused a lot of resistance. The snows came, and now we had gotten across the Moselle River. We had gotten through the Siegfried Line. Wherever there was a little town or the entrance to the road that went into the town or city had big gun emplacements there, so consequently it was very hard to get through that. However, our Army engineers would often at night they would sneak in and blow up these guns, and that's how we got into the first little town called Tettingen, Germany. That's where we were then, first day of the Battle of the Bulge.
On December 16, 1944, Hitler launched a major offensive against the Allied forces threatening Germany's western border. Intending to split up the Allies and encircle them, German forces began by attacking a weak point on the western front in the Ardennes region. The element of surprise combined with harsh winter weather put the Allies at a severe disadvantage, and they were pushed back from their original front line.
We were driven out of that town. We were fighting in terrible cold weather. Many of the guys had their feet frozen, and trench foot would cause. So they were a casualty and had to be sent to protect their back to the hospitals. We got a lot of. They really hit us with an awful lot of artillery and infantry. Of course, we were covering a large area and scattered. We weren't condensed because the cavalry unit being like it is, parts of us were here and scattered all over a long area. It seemed as though they could overcome and beat us and defeat us.
However, weather conditions improved on December 23rd, and the Allies were able to launch an aerial counteroffensive that devastated German supply lines. General Hasso von Manteuffel recommended retreat, but Hitler rejected this plan. Although the Allies, especially the Americans, suffered heavy losses in this battle, they managed to destroy the Luftwaffe, use up German supply reserves, and gain back all the ground they had lost.
It was one of the biggest battles that the American Army has ever fought. There were over 40,000 American casualties and over 40,000 German casualties and over 40,000 American prisoners taken and over 42,000 German prisoners taken. It was a terrible battle, one of the biggest battles, as I say, that the American Army has ever fought.
This battle marked a turning point in the war. The two-front war that Germany had been fighting had stretched the country's resources and weapons thin, but the loss of the Battle of the Bulge severely depleted them. Hitler was now unable to make any more offensive moves, and the Allies began to work their way towards Berlin from both the east and the west.
We are now back on the line where we were before the Bulge, and so we start to make advances. So our mission that day was to go across an open area and into another area which we didn't, they said that there was no resistance. I was back here, I was in the 3rd platoon, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd platoon. I was with the 3rd platoon. The first 5 tanks got right over in front, within 100 yards of these big anti-tank guns that was buried into the ground level, and it would be very difficult to see them. Within 5 minutes, they're all blown up, on fire, and bodies everywhere. And our captain was with us on that mission, and as soon as he heard the first, immediately he said, just reverse and get out, turn around, because we didn't want to keep going into that. And so we spent the rest of us that afternoon later, went on patrol to get up and help, see if there's any wounded that had tried to crawl back or get back. We did get some, but a lot of men died that particular day. We lost the 5 tanks just in no time. There was a lot of we talked about friends, they were all my friends, got killed or injured, wounded bad that day. But that was a terrible thing about combat. You never knew what you were going to run into. Next thing you know, our objective was to get to the Rhine River. It's a large river that runs through Germany. They're very fast-moving currents. We crossed that early in the morning on pontoon bridges. Now, the Germans always blew up the bridges that would get you across. So we had to put pontoons down, and then they put a track over that, and that's what we drove across. After we got across, we made a lot of advances fast, and we'd make maybe 50 miles a day going into Germany. Now we are headed towards Berlin. The whole Third Army was headed towards Berlin, but Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin had a meeting on as to who was going to take Berlin and how they were going to encircle the Germans and eventually their surrender. The Russians were given the job of taking Berlin, the city of Berlin. We were told to go south and east towards Austria and Czechoslovakia, which we did. We finally got to the Austrian border, to a little town across the river, the Enns River, a town called Braunau, where Adolf Hitler was born. We crossed that we were going east, south and east, to meet the Russians at the Elbe River. Now, the Germans are surrendering to us in droves. The Germans were just so thankful to be able to surrender to Americans rather than having the Russians capture them. The Russians had a tough army, and they were after revenge because of what Hitler did to invade Russia. We got to the town of a town called Ebensee, Austria, in the Alp Mountains, and all our orders was to get to the town, see if there was resistance. If not, just to outpost it and oversee the town and wait for the end of the war. Got into the little town, and the beautiful, clean town. The streets are spotless. No litter, no white papers, tin cans, nothing like we have here. We took over what was called the Post Hotel, a beautiful little hotel in that town. This is where we were going to take over the rooms and everything, and that we would be there till the end of the war. We had heard approximately 3 weeks before about the concentration camps from an army newspaper called the Stars and Stripes. We were sitting there reading about it. We said we'd hope we never, ever have to run into something like this.
In the implementation of Hitler's final solution, or eradication of all Jewish people, concentration camps were established across all of Nazi-occupied Europe. In the mountainous town of Ebensee, Austria, a concentration camp was established with two purposes. First, to kill Jewish and political prisoners, and second, to build synthetic fuel production centers and mountain tunnels for use in the war, especially in the Battle of Britain. Prisoners in other concentration camps dreaded being sent to Ebensee, as the starvation and strenuous work meant almost certain death. This horrifying sight stood in stark contrast to its beautiful surroundings, and the American soldiers who were instructed to liberate it had no idea of what they would face.
I got the orders from my lieutenant to take my tank and another tank and go to the gates of the concentration camp. And when we got about 200-300 yards out, you could smell the terrible smell of death. And as we made the turn, a right-hand turn, we then could peer forth, and all over on our left and ahead of us was all of these, what I thought were just skeletons standing amongst some tall pine trees. It just was a ghost-like scene. And then they opened the gates. I was the lead tank. We went in to this roll-call square area and stopped our two tanks side by side, shut the engines off, and we just peered out of our tanks at what we were looking at. They now knew that they were being freed. They were celebrating like you wouldn't believe, pandemonium. It just broke out. And I remember raising my seat higher, and I took out a cigarette. So when I lit this cigarette, a man down here beside my tank, he says, "It's been a long time since I've had a lucky strike." I looked at him. I told him to come up on the tank, and he crawled up. He had the strength to crawl up on the tank. I lit a cigarette from mine and gave it to him.
The prisoner was Max Garcia, a Jewish man originally from the Netherlands who had moved to Spain along with his parents and his sister in an attempt to escape the spread of the Third Reich. When he and his family were deported to Auschwitz, Max was deemed a good worker and sent to Ebensee. His mother, father, and sister, however, were murdered. At Ebensee, Max's ability in architecture meant that he could help design camp structures and was therefore treated better than many of the other prisoners.
He said, "Now, get down off of the tanks and come with me. I'll show you the whole camp."
Max led the American soldiers past a series of disturbing sights throughout the camp. First, the eviscerated body of a prisoner who had been collaborating with the SS in return for better treatment. Next, to the abandoned camp kitchen. After that, to one of the barracks filled with dying prisoners.
To smell that, to see that, to be initiated to that was more than a human being could bear almost.
It was the final stop on the tour, however, that was the most horrific sight. The tour group passed piles of dead bodies as they walked through the door of the crematorium. Inside, more dead bodies were stacked around the still warm ovens.
I must tell you, I had seen combat. I had seen death. My dear friends killed. But that was a climax of it all. I know I radioed, as I say, my lieutenant, and told him also when I said, we got to get them some food. The next day, with them big kettles that I was telling you about, we used them to make soup. But then, those that gulped that food down would grab their stomach and keel over in agony and die there on the spot.
The prisoners had been overworked and starved. Their metabolisms and internal organs could not handle the amount of soup that they ate at once, and as a result, their hearts stopped.
So it was a terrible thing we'd done, but we didn't realize that.
As concentration camps were liberated across Europe, Allied military leaders were left looking for someone to blame. General Walton Walker was the first to turn to those living near the camps, as he ordered the mayor of the German town of Ohrdruf and his wife to tour the Ohrdruf concentration camp. General George S. Patton then suggested that all of the residents of Ohrdruf be required to tour the camp. Before long, residents near all liberated concentration camps, including Ebensee, were ordered to tour them and, later, to help clean them up.
I'll never forget how I saw a group of women in tears crying. They lived right down there, 2.5 miles down in that little town. They knew the concentration camp was there. They didn't have no idea how they were being treated.
With Germany's surrender on May 8, 1945, and the liberation of the concentration camps, the war in Europe was over. On May 19th, the 3rd Cavalry celebrated its 99th birthday. General George S. Patton spoke at this celebration, stating that the soldiers would be sent home for a 30-day furlough before following him on the invasion of Japan.
That didn't really go over too good, but if we had to, we had to. We knew that. Nothing you could do.
However, this invasion would never come.
When I was home on furlough, they dropped an atomic bomb, and then they dropped another bomb a week later. And that ended the war. That saved us from going over. Something fell off of our shoulders. That helped us forget that terrible, terrible camp. I came back to Marengo, that's where I was living, as I said. I wouldn't dare mention that I saw that terrible. People would thought I was crazy, because they didn't realize it. Nobody did. My outfit, in 1947 on until 2009, had reunions somewhere in the United States every year. Had we not been together, if we never had these reunions, I don't know when I would have talked about them. Because you just were, you want to forget it, but then couldn't. And about first 10 years, we didn't have our wives or any of our family go with us to reunions. And then finally started doing that. Started talking, and then the next few years the women said, tell us about that. Well, that's how we finally started talking about the concentration camp. I think of that camp, often, all these years since then.
When Robert Persinger was drafted, he never had any idea of what he would encounter in World War II. Still, like so many others, he faced the unknown with bravery. From 1943 to 1945, Robert saw battle, suffering, and death across Western Europe. Yet he still managed to give his best to contribute to one of the most important outcomes in history.
So, I guess maybe the history books today, I don't know if they talk much about World War II or not, but it was a terrible time. And if we hadn't defeated Japan and Germany, I don't know what we'd had here today. So we done a lot of good for the world. That's all I can say. And I would like for one thing is that you never forget that when you get older, that you talk to or you heard a man talk about a concentration camp and that there really was such a thing.
All of human history is one story with many chapters, many conflicts, and many heroes, each helping to write the chapter we live in today. However, history is too often considered to be just that, a story distant and unrelated to our lives. The truth is, we owe our very existences to the actions of those who came before us. The importance of recognizing history really only became evident to me when I visited Germany with my German class. While there, I toured the concentration camp site in Dachau. Learning about Hitler's final solution in school was sad, but seeing one of the places where prisoners were overworked and killed really drove home the importance to me. Still though, World War II was hard to connect to reality, a distant war fought by anonymous soldiers. Robert Persinger put a face to World War II and the liberation of concentration camps, finally grounding the story in reality for me. His interview footage allowed me to see World War II from a human perspective. He told me about the horrors of war, but he also showed me the hope in any situation and the relief that comes when the worst is over. He taught me that a positive outlook is the key to making your way through tough situations. Finally, he shared his thoughts and fears, allowing me to see that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary bravery. The life I live is a good one. I have loving parents, caring friends, and unique activities and organizations to take part in. I can listen to my favorite music, go to school, and speak my mind without fear of serious repercussions, either from the government or otherwise. I have traveled often, each time meeting amazing new people from various cultural backgrounds. None of these things, none of the experiences or interests that I believe make me uniquely me, would have been possible without the efforts of Robert Persinger and others like him. In the end, I have gained immense respect for Robert Persinger and the rest of the greatest generation. It is so inspiring to realize that, with bravery, it is possible to change the world for the better. After all, the soldiers who fought in World War II and the civilians who had to survive a changing way of life were not all that different from us. And recognizing that is really what the whole veteran documentary experience is about. Bridging the gap between the heroes of one chapter of human history and the young people of another.